everyone, it's Bob McCraney with the Flee Red States Project, Texas Pride Realty Group, Home Smart Stars. Today we have Dan Brotman with us. Now, Dan and I ran into each other on the internet, as people do, and we discovered that what he's doing in his group and what we're doing with our group, there's a lot of synergy and a lot of things going on that we can collaborate on. So, Dan, I want to welcome you. Thank you for coming on the podcast. And I'm just going to give you the floor. Tell people what you're doing.
Sure. Well, I'll start out by saying I'm originally from the US. I grew up in Boston and I've lived out of the US as an expat for nearly 20 years. I've lived in 5 different countries and I'm about to get my fourth citizenship, and I was only born with one. Immigration is a lived experience for me. It's a passion. It's my academic background too. And currently, what I focus on is investment migration. And I'm sure we're going to get into what investment migration is, but I also have a specific focus on the LGBTQ plus community because most investment migration programs don't work for our community, but some do.
So, what is investment migration? Let's ask the obvious first question.
So when I talk to people about alternative citizenship and residency, I break it down and say there are 3 ways to get it. One way is the traditional route, which is you immigrate to another country, live there for a few years, and eventually become a citizen. The second way is through ancestry. Your grandmother was born in Ireland. You're eligible to apply for Irish citizenship based on descent. And the third way is investment migration. Investment migration is when you make an investment or a donation in a government approved program, and in exchange for your investment, you're granted citizenship or residency without the requirement to actually move there. So many people do it because they want a stronger passport, or they want to stay in the country that they're currently in, but they want an insurance policy. And so it's a plan B for them.
Excellent. Excellent. So where are you seeing LGBTQ people? You know, we deal with the safety of people moving out of the country. Where would you be safe? Where's a good advantageous investment visa right now that is welcoming of LGBTQ and our marriages, our families, things like that?
Sure. So there are many investment migration programs out there. I actually work in 18 different programs across the world, but only 3 of them really work for our community right now. And that's something I'm trying to change in my industry. Those 3 programs are in Portugal, Malta, and Greece. I'm happy to chat more about those programs, but essentially, all 3 programs recognize same-sex marriage. And in fact, Malta was ranked the 5th strongest country in Europe for queer rights. So those would be 3 really good options. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, most countries that offer investment migration don't recognize same-sex marriage, and so they're just not really options for our community. But I think that with time, we can change that.
Interesting. So Greece is on your list. It's not on ours, and it probably should be.
Greece is, yes. So the way that it works is the programs are all very different. Portugal is probably the best known program because traditionally, up until 2023, people could make a real estate investment in Greece and obtain residency in exchange for their real estate investment. That actually went away in 2023 because of income inequality in Portugal. So many young people in Portugal cannot afford to even rent apartments in places like Lisbon anymore, and the government was under enormous pressure. So there are basically 2 ways now to obtain residency in Portugal through investment. One is you can invest 500,000 euros in a qualifying investment fund. So some people do that. The other route is you can actually make a donation to a heritage charitable foundation in Portugal approved by the government. So you're not going to see a return on that, but you pay the 250 and then that's it. You have your residency. The requirement to maintain your residency in Portugal is to spend 14 days every 2 years there. You renew your residency card every 2 years. Um, up until last week, and this is about to change, after 5 years of maintaining your temporary residency in Portugal by just spending 2 weeks 2 weeks every 2 years there, you could apply for citizenship, for European Union citizenship in Portugal. There was a requirement to speak A2 Portuguese, which is pretty basic Portuguese. And that was really the only investment migration program on the continent that had a pathway to citizenship without actually having to move there. Last week, the Portuguese Parliament passed a bill which is now extending that from 5 years to 10 years. So there still is a pathway to citizenship without moving there. It's just a lot longer. It's double the time. It is 10 years. In addition to that, the applications are quite backlogged. So people are waiting sometimes 2 years, 2 to 3 years for the residency to be approved. And with this new bill, if the president signs it into law, the countdown for your 10 years is only going to start once you're approved. Previously, it was at the time of submission, you didn't have to wait for the approval for your 5 years to start counting. So we're talking potentially a 13 to 14 year timeline to actually get Portuguese citizenship through this route. Again, the president hasn't signed it into law yet, but we're waiting to see if that's going to be the law of the land, and that is a major change in Portugal, the biggest change since they got rid of the real estate option. Um, my favorite program is Malta right now for people in our community. Malta, there are basically two ways of doing it. One way is you can rent an apartment for 14,000 euros a year, which works out to about 1,600 euros a month. You're not allowed to sublet it. So you rent the apartment and you hold on to it for 5 years as a rental. You're granted permanent residency from the beginning. But it's a 5 year commitment. After the 5 years, you don't have to rent that apartment anymore. You just need to maintain an address in Malta. And then the other avenue is to actually purchase real estate in Malta. So you can purchase a property for 375,000 euros, but you can rent it out. It just needs to be a long-term rental, not a short-term rental. You need to hold on to it for 5 years. And then after 5 years, again, you can sell it, and you just need an address in Malta in order to maintain your permanent residency. If you want to obtain Maltese citizenship, and Malta is in the European Union, you will actually have to live in Malta for 5 years. But if you're not looking for citizenship, you're happy with permanent residency, then as long as you maintain that investment for the first 5 years, you have your permanent residency in a European Union country. And then the third option is Greece. Greece is very different from Portugal in that it is primarily real estate focused, except the amounts have really gone up. So if you want to buy a property in a major city in Greece like Athens, Thessaloniki, Mykonos, the property needs to be at least 800,000 euros. If you're
Okay.
going to purchase a property in a more remote part of Greece, that drops to 400,000 euros. And then there's another option, which is the most affordable, which is if you're willing to purchase a commercial property that's going to be converted into a residential property,
Ah,
that is 250,000 euros. So that would be the most affordable way of doing it. The catch with Greece is that your permanent residency is tied to your property ownership. So when you choose to, if and when you choose to sell your property in Greece, you lose your permanent residency. You can rent it out. Whereas with Malta, you're only making a 5 year commitment to hold on to that property. After 5 years, you're free to sell it. So there are pros and cons to all of these programs. The good news is that same-sex marriage is recognized in all three countries. Um, in addition, another
but
nuance is healthcare, which I know is a big issue for people in our community.
Yes.
And so that's the other nuance. So get this, in Portugal, you get temporary residency, but you get access to healthcare, education, and you have the right to work. In Malta, in Greece, you get permanent residency, but you don't have the automatic right to work, and you do not have the automatic right to healthcare or education. In fact, in Greece and Malta, you have to get a work permit, even though you're a permanent resident, if you want to look for a job, but you are free to run your own business. And then in terms of healthcare, You are while you're a permanent resident on this program, you do have to have private health care. So you're not entitled to the universal health care in Greece and Malta. So pros and cons to all of these programs, but these are the three programs that work for our community right now.
So that's the first time I've heard that uh, you could go get residency via buying a property and you're able to rent it out. Like I the property thing is I was following up in Portugal and they just changed that because it was becoming so expensive for locals to actually be able to live. Um, then we go to healthcare. So I went to Spain about 2 weeks ago, and one of the conversations I had with somebody about healthcare was like it was this couple and they pay about 80 euros a month for private healthcare, and there really aren't a big expense in co-pays. The insurance
Mhm.
company has no say on what the doctor prescribes or the treatment that is provided. I thought to myself, just my monthly premium and my copays is enough to rent a two-bedroom apartment in Valencia, Spain. Not even like in the suburbs, like in the city. And then $40 a year, 40 euros a month for private healthcare. And they said they had the option for the public healthcare system, but they chose private because they don't speak very good Spanish yet. They're still working on their Spanish. They want a doctor that they could choose that spoke English. But that was the only thing. And honestly, I'm like, financially, just on healthcare alone, it makes sense to go to these other countries because they're not being gouged when it comes to their health insurance.
You're absolutely correct. And as I mentioned, in Portugal, you're automatically going to get the healthcare. In Malta, you will get the healthcare. You just have to make a decision that you're actually going to live in Malta. And again, it's a simplified work permit if you're a permanent resident. It's not a complicated process. But once you have your work permit, you're entitled to national healthcare there. As I mentioned, I've lived in 5 countries. And I've lived for 20 years abroad. I've lived in 2 countries with national healthcare, with universal healthcare. Currently, I'm in Canada. I've been in Canada for over 4 years. I was shocked as an American when you go to the doctor here or any kind of medical procedure, you just give your health card. There's no discussion of money. It's actually illegal. And I don't know if it's either nationally or at least in the Canadian provinces that I've lived in for doctors to actually accept payment for treatment. So you give your card, no discussion of money whatsoever. And then I lived in the UK last year, and in the UK and in England specifically, there's just a dispensary fee for medication. So for my medication, even if it was really expensive, I was paying a maximum of £9 something, less than £10. Which so again, there's pros and cons to universal healthcare, but overall, as a younger, healthier person, I've mostly had positive experiences in, operating in a universal healthcare system.
We hear a lot of that from people who are experiencing that, and it it's probably they say it's one of the biggest reliefs they have is that they don't have to worry about that one thing that will put them behind on making their car payment or their rent or their mortgage, that one accident, that one trauma, and it seems to be a common theme that people are saying, I can just I it's if my child breaks her leg, it's going to be taken care of. I don't have to wonder how much is this going to cost me.
Correct. I
Right.
mean, even giving birth, even giving birth in a country like Canada or the UK is free. Another interesting thing I forgot to mention about Portugal is that even with your temporary residence permit, if your child is born in Portugal, they become a Portuguese citizen. So even though it might take you, uh, you know, 13, 14 years to become a Portuguese citizen, you can at least give that to your child by them being born there to a resident.
Oh,
So one of the things going back to the US system versus the other systems,
Sure.
we are taught from a very early age to defend the capitalistic for-profit healthcare system. We're taught that, well, other countries send people to us to do people want this is the best healthcare money can buy, and we're all taught these things to say because we don't know any better.
Mhm.
And there may be, some affluent people fly to the US to get a surgery, whatever. But I also know people take healthcare vacations to Mexico to get a surgery because they can't afford it here. They're going to other places to get things done because they can't afford it in the US. And in the last week or so, with everything going on with, all these with the shutdown, and I don't want to go into it too much, but I've got people posting that their rates are going up six, seven, $800 a month to the point that they can't afford healthcare, let alone food right now.
Yeah,
What
I,
we
I read
have,
that. Hmm.
what we have that other countries don't have, and I love my friends in the military. I believe in the military. We have, 11 nuclear carriers and 50 nuclear submarines. We have that and a for-profit healthcare, and the upper 1, 2, 3, 4% in corporations not paying in. And we're taught that that's what we should defend at a gut level, and we should just say these lines. But if you look at it and think about it and talk to people from around the world, or maybe go visit, what you find is that they're not they're not doing without healthcare. They're not doing without this. And what I was told was, well, you're just going to have to wait, weeks and weeks and weeks to see a doctor. I've got friends in the US, they get diagnosed with something, it's 3 or 4 or 5 weeks before they can get into the specialist. But they're going to have to go into debt to see the specialist.
Well,
That's just, that's not the best we can do. And to suggest differently is un-American.
I
well,
heard a story about a girl who she was an au pair in France and she got bronchitis and she put it off and put it off and put it off going to the doctor because she didn't know how much it was going to cost. And she goes to the doctor, she goes to the emergency room and they do the chest x-ray. And then they take her down the hall and they read the chest x-ray to her. My doctor has to send me out for a chest x-ray. They cannot read it to me. They have to send it to somebody else to read it, who then relays the information that from the time I see my doctor to the time I get the results of that chest x-ray, it can be 3 months. By
Yeah.
then, I've already been treated for what it was. But she talked about how she went in there, she got the chest x-ray, got it, they gave her medication. They did everything in one spot for her, all in one day. And she kept on asking how much is it, and they kept looking at her like she was funny, like she didn't know. And ultimately, her prescription was $8. That's all she paid was $8. Then we heard another story. Cassie went to Uruguay with her children and her husband. Her daughter was in ICU for 5 days. It was like 19 US dollars. Like, I mean,
right.
healthcare is like a big issue. And then you look at education. I'm encouraging my friends who have kids that are about to graduate high school, send them to Europe, send them to the Netherlands to get their education. Not only will they get an overseas experience, they will meet new people. They will probably come back with a much different perspective of the world, and they will have an education that is dirt cheap, and sometimes in
Yeah.
some countries free.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, a couple of things. So something that really changed my life and when I decided to go abroad for the longest stretch was in 2010, I graduated university and we had the global financial crisis. And I grew up pretty comfortable. And during the GFC, my dad, we almost lost our home. We almost lost everything. And all of a sudden, I experienced what it meant to have bad health care, which I didn't know before. My dad had to downgrade our healthcare plan. I was in college, and I had doctor's appointments. I had various medical checkups that needed to be done and tests, and I was out of network. And so a lot of my time wound up being fighting with the insurance companies, negotiating with the insurance companies, getting authorizations, and I realized that I had taken for granted having good health care, and that was simply because my parents could afford it until they couldn't. And the same thing for university. Um, and so basically, what my story of how I really went abroad for the long stretch that I've been on was when the GFC happened, all of my fellow students were moving home unemployed. There weren't jobs. And I said, well, my world is big, so if there aren't jobs here, I'm gonna go to a different part of the world where there is opportunity. And at the age of 23, I went to South Africa. The economy was growing at the time, and I had actually spent a year of high school there, and I just really loved it. I went to South Africa without a job, without a plan, And long story short, I wound up finding a really great opportunity and I stayed and wound up living there for over a decade. But a few years into living in South Africa, I got married. And I couldn't sponsor my same-sex husband at the time to move to the US because of the Defense of Marriage Act. So we didn't have the option of even going back to the US. I was paying the same taxes and had the same obligations as every other American, but I was a second-class citizen. When I left the US, gay people couldn't serve in the military. Our marriages were not federally recognized. I didn't have the same immigration rights for my spouse. And so that's sort of what kept me abroad initially. And then I just wound up building my life abroad. Um, but it's for me, it's quite worrying right now because the last time I remember living in the US, I was a second-class citizen. And I know that there's a lot of concern right now around the erosion of rights for people in our community. And it's just unfathomable to think that, like, 15 plus years later, we're still having this conversation. Our rights are still up for discussion. And I don't really want to opt into that anymore. I've been out for so long that I don't really miss it. It's like if you haven't eaten chocolate in 15 years, you don't really miss chocolate anymore. And that's kind of how I feel about the US.
I'm gonna have to think about that for a minute because like if you get used to something different, it becomes what you're used to.
Hmm.
Your new normal.
Yeah.
One thing that we've talked before on the podcast is when people no longer have to worry that everybody in the restaurant is armed.
Hmm.
When you no longer have to worry about anyone in the restaurant caring about if you're holding your partner's hand, a guy's hand, a trans person's hand, you don't have to worry about any of that crap. You don't have to worry about the lifted truck that's driving next to you and what they think of you. When you don't have that weight, Leslie goes to a restaurant, is always aware of what exit he can get out of
Oh
because,
yeah. And listen, I
guns.
grew up in North Texas. Everybody had a gun. Like in high school, kids had gun racks in their trucks with actual guns on the racks that had
Wow.
actual bullets in them. That was the 80s. It was very common. It was not a big deal. I look on your face like what?
No, no, again, it goes back to what Bob was saying is
Yeah.
that, your different becomes your new normal. So,
Hmm.
for example, I'm living in Canada where pepper spray is outlawed. Like, I didn't even think about guns. I was living in the UK where I don't even think the police are armed. So,
Unless they're at the palace. They had guns. I was in London. They had guns behind those gates. I saw them.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think you worry about other issues, but in
Yeah.
terms of some of the issues that I worried about in the US, I mean, for me, my rights being up for discussion, I don't think about that. And I mean, even in Canada, and don't get me wrong, Canada's not a paradise. Every country has problems, but issues
Yeah.
like issues around the queer community, abortion rights, universal health care, gun rights, like or banning gun or making it more difficult to obtain an assault weapon. These are like it's a fait accompli. It's done. Like this is not up for discussion. This is not up for debate. It doesn't matter really which political party you vote for. Like it's just not up for discussion anymore. And I felt the same way in the UK. I felt the same way in South Africa, especially around LGBT rights. I don't know if you knew this. The first country to protect gay people in the Constitution was South Africa. So these were just issues I didn't think about. Healthcare, certainly living in Canada, like healthcare costs is just not like it's unfathomable. I don't think about that. I worry about other costs. We have expensive housing here. The cost of groceries is going up. So I certainly think about those issues. But yeah, healthcare, guns, and my rights as a gay person are not something that I even think about.
And we get to the point that, it's down to the library level. It's not like this is, at the presidential or the national level. Every election from dog catcher up has to talk about our rights, has to talk about whether or not, at the city council level or at the whatever, and we are just the political football. And ever since I came out in '92, just in the middle of the AIDS pandemic, and I don't think there's been an election at any level that my rights were not something people were angry or talking about. And gay marriage has only been around, I believe, 10 years. Don't ask, don't tell was only struck down probably around the same amount of time. We've only had, equality in air quotes for a short time, relatively, and it's still up for debate. And I don't see anybody else's, marriage being discussed in this way every election. So when you don't have to deal with that, you can get on with living so much differently than you do when you're always embattled.
When
I
Bob and I
agree.
started talking about going, looking at other countries, for me, it was during the pandemic. A friend of mine got an assignment at the U.S. Embassy in Mexico City, and he said, and we've been locked down for 2 weeks now. He's like, you should come visit. And I was like, this weekend? He's like, really? I was like, yes. And I went, and there was no stress about the mask. People just put their mask on when they walked in the door. No, there was no fighting. No, it was so it was just a relief not to hear all of that going back and forth. And that's when I was like, where can I go? And then Bob and I sit down. I was like, all right, what's important? We need to make sure our rights are protected. We need to make sure we would feel safe in that country. We make sure we have good healthcare, that we can find community, and of course, we want a good passport because I can go to Paraguay with $5,000 and kind of just settle in. But we looked at all of those things, and that's when Bob started drawing out this map, like where could we go? And we started talking to other people, and we realized we weren't the only ones. It was like, all right, maybe it's time to leave. And when people ask me, I was like, I've lived in the United States, Texas, my entire life. There's a whole world out there. There's no reason I shouldn't go live somewhere else. You know, as long as I can take my dog, I'm good.
And I've taken both of my dogs abroad. One of them is actually with me right now. But yeah, I mean, I guess what I'm really worried about is I don't know if you know of the analogy of the frog in the boiling water, where you don't feel the temperature rising. You adjust as it gets hotter and hotter and hotter until you're boiled to death. Um, what I'm a little disturbed about right now is I haven't been to the US in almost a year. I am going this month for my 20th high school reunion, so it's going to be interesting to be back. But, you know, there are some people who are alarmed for sure, but there are also many people who don't seem worried. And that for me is kind of what's the most shocking. And I think that there's a lot of abnormality that's becoming normalized. So again, I think political violence, shootings, what's happening with healthcare, government shutdowns. I have a friend who works in the US Army. He's an assistant dean at an institution in the US Army. He's cleaning toilets now because they can't pay the cleaning staff because of the shutdown. This isn't normal. Whether or not you like what's happening with the election in New York today, I just see a country where the politics are becoming so extreme on both ends. You have a heavily armed population. Political violence is becoming the norm, but so many people don't seem concerned, and I don't think people should, be alarmist. But what I always say, and especially as gay people, we've been persecuted throughout history. Our antennas should always be up and working. We should always be. It doesn't mean you need to flee. But it means you need to always be on the lookout for signs of danger, and you need to decide for yourself what is your red line. Once that red line is crossed, you need to decide what action are you going to take. So again, what I do professionally is I help people obtain the paperwork that they need before that red line is crossed. So once it's crossed, they're immediately on a plane. Because those options may not exist in the near future, so better to get grandfathered in now. But I think each and every person out there needs to think, what is their red line? If same-sex marriage were not recognized, within a state, if a state wouldn't perform same-sex marriage anymore, is that your red line? What would your red line be? That's something that I guess I don't grapple with anymore because I don't live in the US. But I can certainly tell you that if I were living in the US right now, my antenna would be like, overheated because I'm really, really worried, just
I
generally.
I can tell you that our website stats and our phone calls spike every time something makes the temperature hotter. And people go, oh my gosh, now is the time. And then they spend a week with it and go, oh, okay, I'm used to this level of heat. And my thought is, okay, but next time it gets hotter, you're just going to still be worse off. My thought is, and I think you and I talked about this before, is let's say that something happens where everybody decides, oh my gosh, we got to move. When everybody puts their home on the market to get out, and they're, the people selling the house are Mark and Steve, is the buyer going to bid as much knowing you kind of have to get out? If the seller is, Michelle and Michael is on the deed because it's a dead name, is the buyer going to bid as high knowing that you have to get away? When people are forced into migration, people will lose wealth, property, and their lives. And people may say right now, well, it's not a forced migration, you're making a choice. Yes, but there's nothing that says this is not going to keep going south. Those of us who've studied history see the parallels, and it just drives us crazy that those who are, making a different choice to sit around and wait and just see how it goes. And, oh my gosh, I'm from here. I know nothing's going to happen to me. I worry for them. And we don't have to sit around and wait to see. We pay taxes. It's a consumer situation. If we pay for a product and it's not a good product, we can go buy a new product. Okay. If we pay taxes into Florida or Texas or one of these other states, Alabama, and we don't get our rights, we can move and pay our taxes to another state where we do get our rights. We don't have to keep eating at the same bad restaurant. We can get up and go to a new restaurant. And nobody who's like, I have people in blue states who try to shame us. And they'll be like, well, if you don't stay there, who's going to vote to change it? I don't have to eat at the same crappy restaurant because if I don't go there every day, the manager won't hear from enough people that the food is bad. The manager doesn't care. It's a crappy restaurant. Let's go someplace where we're not going to get sick.
I agree.
Let's be
And
honest,
also, yeah.
Bob, you and I have been doing this since the early 90s. So it's
Yeah.
not like we haven't fought the fight. Like we've been there, we've been through it, and now we both see the regression. And we're like, I've done this. And I I got a great when Bob and I both started becoming baby activists. Two of the we went to dinner with two of the Dallas Gay and Lesbian Alliance board members, and they one of them said, you know, don't get stuck in this where you think you're the only one that can make can make change. And he said, pick a date and pick a goal. Whichever comes first, step aside. Somebody else can carry that baton.
Yeah.
And so when people like try to guilt us, like, well, why would you want to leave? Who's going to stay and fight? It's like, I did. I
Well,
did my part.
the other thing is that, first of all, I mean, migration is not permanent. So, you can be like, I don't like what's happening right now. I'm going to
Right.
go away for a few years and wait and see. And if things improve, maybe I'll move back. And if they don't improve, then I'm out. I'm out already. So I think that, psychologically, when you say I'm leaving a place permanently, it's a big burden because then you wonder, oh, well, what if it doesn't work out? But if you tell yourself, I'm going on an adventure, I'm going to do it for a few years, I'm going to try it out. If the situation changes, I can always move back. Life is very fluid. I think that takes the pressure off of you. And Bob, I just want to say what you said really resonates with me. So I'm Jewish. It's a very important part of my identity. And, in the 1930s, when my people were fleeing Europe, yeah, they sold all of their belongings and their homes for next to nothing because everyone knew that they had no choice and they had to leave very, very quickly.
Yeah.
People lost everything because of that. When I look at my people, what happened in the 1930s, and I'm not comparing the situation in the US, of course, to Hitler and to, what happened in World War II, but I'm just talking generally about the rise of authoritarianism. Um, Not all Jews in Germany left. In fact, nearly a very, very large percentage of German Jewry stayed in the country. So you had the people who left as soon as they felt those vibrations in their antennas, And those were the ones who were able to get visas, who were able to sell their property at fair market value. Then you had the people who waited they waited a little bit too long, but not too long that they at least got out. And those were the people that had to go to countries like Ecuador and Bolivia. Those were the only countries that would take them. They didn't sell their homes at a fair market value, but at least they got out of Germany. But you had close to half of the German Jewish community stayed because it's a human psychology mechanism. Humans tell ourselves, this is temporary, it's going to get better, it'll change, this too shall pass. We do that throughout history. You know, I've spent time in some very crazy countries, ranging from Afghanistan to Iran. Um, and what always fascinates me in these countries, these people live under very, very difficult conditions, is for those who have the option of staying, why do they stay? Some of it, to be honest, is fear. I don't think that every person is built to get up and move. You have to be incredibly brave to be able to restart your life somewhere else. You have to be a risk taker to be able to show up in a place where you're a nobody and to start over. It's a financial risk. It's a certain personality type that can do this. Most people aren't built for that. Most people say, this is where I'm from, and so my fate is sealed. That's the majority of people. I don't think we need to be like that. But if you look globally, only 3.6% of the global population lives outside of their country of birth. It is a small percentage of people with that risk tolerance. So what I hope to do, and I'm sure you're also hoping to do, is for those people who have the curiosity or who think maybe I could be part of that 3.6%, to help inspire them, give them the courage, give them the practical tools so that they realize that it's doable. Because I'm just one of many, many Americans who's lived abroad for years. Again, life isn't perfect. You trade one set of problems for another set of problems, but you're 100% right that many of the issues that people my age in the US are worrying about, healthcare, gun violence, losing your civil rights, I don't think about those things because that's not my reality anymore, and that hasn't been my reality for a very long time. And you don't, and even if you're not ready to leave the US, there are options. You could sell your home and move to a blue state or a friendlier state in the interim. You can obtain citizenship or residency by investment, so you have the documentation in case you want to move abroad. There's so many ways to skin this cat.
Yeah. So Dan, how would people get a hold of you?
So people can get a hold of me. Of course, I'm on LinkedIn. So Dan Brotman, I'm at Arton Capital. They can also email me, dbrotman@artoncapital.com. I'm also on Instagram. Dan Brotman is my Instagram handle. And I talk on Instagram, to be honest, a lot of my content is about, my feelings about the US, my experience living abroad as an expat. I've been to 100 countries. I reached my 100th country this summer. So talking about what do I see in terms of people's lives in other countries, the good and the bad. How do people cope with living in very difficult circumstances? So I talk about all those issues. So any of those ways one can get in touch with me. And if anyone's just curious either about investment migration or just about living abroad as an expat, I'd be super happy to speak with them.
Excellent. Can we have you back on in about 6 months and get a checkup?
I would love that. And I'm so appreciative that you had me today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks, Dan.